I don't know if you noticed this or not, but Nintendo loves jerking Earthbound fans around outside of Japan, but even though they are really weird when it comes to this franchise, they always do throw us a bone eventually. And when it comes to the final game in the franchise, Mother 3, I don't see any evidence whatsoever that they're not gonna localize the game at some point. So sit back in your Sensei Ricky's least comfortable lawn chair, and allow me, YouTube's favorite full-grown man, CameronAllOneWord, to tell you why Mother 3's localization's inevitable. If there's one way to describe the Mother franchise outside of Japan, then the phrase slowly but surely pretty much sums it all up. You see, Nintendo translated the very first Mother game all the way back in the early 90s, but then they decided against releasing it, mainly because it was one of those games that needed a battery pack for saves, which costed a lot more money to manufacture. Plus, given that the Super Nintendo was already out at the time, the NES had significantly less steam than it did in Ghostbusters 2, not to mention the fact that RPGs in general weren't exactly the most popular genre in English-speaking countries. So, honestly, I don't really blame Nintendo for not releasing the first Mother game all the way back then. What I do think is batshit crazy, though, is waiting over 20 friggin' years to release a game that was already finished. Like, I know it would have been dumb to put an NES game onto a Super Nintendo or even a 64 cartridge, but since the game was already translated, they could have at least given the compilations of the first two games on the Game Boy Advance an international release. Then again, the only reason that even came out in Japan was to get Japanese fans ready for Mother 3, which they didn't plan on releasing in North America, so even then, I guess I get it. Back then, there wasn't nearly as big of a cult following of the franchise as there is now, outside of Ness being that one kid from Smash Bros. That nobody's ever heard of, and Earthbound didn't exactly light the world on fire either, so... But being completely honest, I don't blame Nintendo for thinking Mother 3 would bomb outside of Japan, and therefore not seeing a reason to release the compilation of the first two games on the Game Boy Advance. But no matter how obscure this franchise might have been, though, I don't think there was any good excuse not to release it on the Wii's Virtual Console. I mean, would have been digital, so it's not like there were any production costs or worries of sitting on boxes of unopened copies, not to mention the fact that the game was already friggin' done, but nope, they just kinda didn't do it. Although, something I don't think people really consider is the fact that neither of the first two Mother games came out on the Wii's Virtual Console in Japan either, so kinda makes sense that they wouldn't come out in North America. This is around the time period where the popularity of Earthbound's legend started to grow in English-speaking countries. In fact, this is actually when I found out the game even existed at all. I mean, I remember seeing Ness in Smash Bros, but nobody I ever actually played those games without any idea who he was, even though some people lied and pretended like they did. As far as the Wii's Virtual Console is concerned, though, I remember hearing a bunch of rumors about how Nintendo could never release the game again because one of the characters looked like Mr. T, but the game was eventually re-released on the Wii U and 3DS's Virtual Console, so I guess that was never really an issue whatsoever, was it? Not too long after the second game got put on the Wii U's Virtual Console, though, Nintendo finally dusted that 20-year-old translated ROM of the original off and put that up as well in 2015. Sadly, most people didn't play it because it was on a console that even cryptozoologists doubted existed, but it was still pretty cool that it finally saw the light of day outside of Japan, though. I'm sure it's possible that there were like one or two people out there who bought a Wii U just to support these games, but for the most part, even hardcore Mother fans weren't going to buy a console just to play 20-year-old games that they probably already played through emulation, and I'd imagine that there were only so few Wii U owners out there willing to pay to try the digital versions out for the first time. So, unfortunately, these games were kind of put in a situation where they couldn't really show Nintendo how much potential the Mother franchise really had. And for whatever reason, they left the first game off of the NES Classic Edition in favor of titles like Star Tropics and Castlevania 2, but it was also left off of the Japanese Famicom Mini as well, so maybe the game's creator, Shigesato Itoi, or hell, even Mr. T just wanted too much money for the rights to include these games or something, I don't know. I mean, they did cost more than the other NES and Super Nintendo games on the Virtual Console did, but then again, the SNES Mini had Earthbound, although that mini console also had 10 fewer games and costed $20 more, so maybe there really is a Mr. T tax for these games, who knows? All I do know is that when the Switch became one of the biggest consoles ever as quickly as it did, I thought it was only a matter of time before Nintendo would add games from their older consoles, specifically from the Mother franchise, but then they kinda got their fingers stuck up their asses for a few years. No, seriously, that's what happened. It was freaking crazy, you should have seen it. Finally, though, the Switch did eventually add NES games via the Nintendo Switch Online service, but rather than selling ROMs individually like they used to, they just included everything to people who subscribed to the new paid service. They did eventually add Super Nintendo games to the catalog as well, but since Nintendo still had their fingers stuck up their bum, neither of the first two Earthbound/Mother games were anywhere to be seen. Instead of adding these two games that everyone was asking for that they actually owned themselves, they decided to pay third parties extra money for the rights to add obscure titles of the service that nobody asked for. Thankfully, though, Nintendo did eventually quickly decide to bring the first 2 Mother games of the Switch's online service, and at the exact same time, no less. Honestly, I'm kinda glad these games weren't available on day 1, because I kinda feel like they would've gotten lost in the shuffle, whereas waiting a while gave them their own spotlight as the only new games, which I really do think led to a lot more people playing them in the long run, but it's still friggin' weird as hell that they waited 5 years to put these on the Switch. Better late than never, I guess, and again, when it comes to Earthbound, it's always a matter of slowly but surely, which brings us to Mother 3. Yeah, I know it might seem like we're never gonna get it at this point, but keep in mind that at the time of this recording, we've only been waiting 16 years. I mean, sure, 16 years is way too long, but don't forget that Nintendo's got tons of games that they haven't sold for even longer, like Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door, which I'd imagine would make Nintendo a lot more money with a re-release. So to them, Mother 3 is just another one of these games that they know they've got in the chamber for a rainy day. Besides, it took 26 years for us to get Earthbound Beginnings, and that game was already translated and ready to go, unlike Mother 3, which Nintendo would still have to translate. Although if random people could do it in their spare time for free, then I'm sure a billion-dollar company can get it done in like an hour tops. I mean, according to a guy I met at Circuit City, that's how long it took for him to translate the first Fire Emblem game anyway. I know it feels like Nintendo's ignoring non-Japanese fans who want Mother 3, but even in Japan, this game only ever came out one time on the Game Boy Advance in 2006, so even if it only came out on the Switch in Japan, it'd still be a really big deal. When Nintendo put the first Mother game out on the Wii U in Japan, they did give it to the rest of the world at the exact same time, so it's not really an issue of Nintendo ignoring English speakers when it comes to Mother 3, it's just something weird about the franchise in general. A lot of people, including myself, used to think that the issues with Mother 3 came down to things like the child Lucas getting high off of mushrooms, but like Yoshi got high with a baby in his custody, and Mario himself's been eating mushrooms in games ever since the 80s, so I don't think anything in Mother 3 is really that big of an issue for a teen-rated game, you know? If anybody cares, then Nintendo could just blatantly ignore them until they pretend to be outraged at something else anyway. So really, I think it's pretty clear that the issue with Mother 3 is a global one rather than just for English speakers. Maybe the creator Shigesato Itoi is actually a really famous comedian in Japan, just doesn't want these games being re-released willy-nilly, or maybe it just costs extra, but it seems how the series producer Shinichi Kameoka has been publicly saying that he wants the game to get a global re-release, then there's really no way that it's never gonna happen in my opinion. With Nintendo making the first 2 games available to over 30 million Switch Online subscribers, I'd imagine that the franchise is gonna make a lot of new fans, and with more popularity than ever, I personally think that the best time to capitalize on re-releasing Mother 3 would be sooner rather than later, probably by the end of 2023 once people have finally had a chance to actually finish the first 2 games. If Nintendo really wanted to cash in on Mother 3 and make a significant profit though, then I think they should give us something along the lines of Kiriomatic's fan-made video of a Mother 3 remake in a similar style of a Link's Awakening remake. I mean, it would certainly justify not re-releasing the Game Boy Advance version for over 16 years, and people would be a lot more willing to spend full retail price on it than they would like $10 for the original. And I'm no game designer anymore, but I'd imagine that it wouldn't really take that much effort for Nintendo to make, but what I think the most likely reason why we've been waiting so long for Mother 3 though is because the above average sized end's just plain weird when it comes to this franchise. To be fair though, there's really no rush though, because Shigesato Itoi already said he's done with the series forever, and without his unique sense of humor, you really can't make a Mother game, just like how you can't make a Metal Gear game without Hideo Kojima's frigged up mind. So I mean, if there's only one final game in the franchise left for English speakers, then I can totally understand why Nintendo wouldn't be in a hurry to release it, since they can't exactly milk this franchise for more games. If I had to guess when Mother 3 would realistically be re-released though, then I'd say that it'd probably happen around a year or 2 after they decide to redistribute the rest of their Game Boy Advance libraries that, again, were also never re-released at the time of this recording, aside from the Ambassador program anyway. This is a bit of a long shot, but it'd be pretty freaking cool if the game ended up being a big selling point for the Game Boy Advance Classic Edition though. Full-grown man can dream, can he?
Personally, I don't really care that much if we never get an official English translation for Mother 3, seeing as I already played the game on an actual Game Boy Advance cartridge, albeit a bootleg one, but even so, I don't see any way in HD single hockey stick that it's just never gonna happen. Anyway, that's all for today though. If you liked this video, then you should check out my video I made on fan-translated games where I go into a little more detail on Mother 3, but if you'll excuse me now, I gotta go water my snake. Later.